Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Mark switched on your stream.
I think I have.
Good.
Um,
All good. So we'll go live in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the study season. Track number 3, first session with Mark Richardson about DeFi's concentrated liquidity from scratch. This is the first session in live track number 3, our program at the study season 2024 at TE Academy. We'll have 4 to 5 sessions you can complete with an NFT. And for those of you who are watching via Twitter or YouTube or LinkedIn, you can still register for the study season using this link or go to tokenengineering.net, register, and then you'll have access to all the materials shared in these sessions. You can watch the recordings. You can even take the online exam to acquire your proof of knowledge for DeFi's liquidity from scratch. Go to tokenengineering.net and register. Okay, again, welcome everyone in this call on Zoom, Twitter, LinkedIn, wherever you join us. We'll have Dr. Mark Richardson, project lead Carbon DeFi at Bancor, and he'll walk us through DeFi's concentrated liquidity from scratch. Before we dive in, I'll give you an overview and some information on the materials we share, where you can find them, the process, the live tracks you can expect, etc. So number one, there are 3 main channels or 3 main ways to collaborate. The sync meetings on Zoom, like today, every Thursday, 12:30 UTC, 90 minutes, where we'll discuss and learn with Mark. Then we have async discussions, invite everyone to our Discord. This is an open channel with an open schedule, of course. We'd like to encourage you to form teams, to continue the conversation, to work on homework assignments or exercises together. Really feel free to organize yourself. No limits here. Also, we know that you guys come from various time zones. So just find fellow students and continue collaborating before and after the sessions. And finally, there will be either homework assignments or exercises, explorations you can work on individually or in teams, and you'll have the chance to receive an NFT certificate. Some more words about this in a moment. Some words about cultures and values at TE Academy. So there's the community guidelines available on our Discord with more details. Most importantly, token engineering is a young discipline. Every individual contributing to this discipline matters. We are working quite cross-disciplinary. You'll meet engineers, data scientists, design, economists here, and that's actually a superpower of the token engineering community. Feel free to reach out in case you have questions. There are no stupid questions whatsoever. And feel free to get in touch with your fellow students via Discord or otherwise. Be mindful, ask for support, yes. Be mindful when asking for support. Praise those who provided support to you and try to give back as well. And this way, we have a lot of fun together, I'd say. Minting NFTs. So TE Academy has established a system of proofs, non-transferable, non-fungible tokens to represent achievements, knowledge gathered in the token engineering discipline to students as well as practitioners and researchers in the field. So far, we have minted more than 1,000 NFTs. Now, you can participate in this system via acquiring proofs of knowledge. In this live track, for example, we'll share an online exam from May 30th after we've completed the session program. And then you have the chance to pass the exam and become eligible to receive an NFT. June 6th is the starting date and then mint these NFTs. And in addition to that, this grants you, for example, special voting power in the decision who should receive the first TE Academy Fellowship Grant, 10K, for 4 candidates. You'll find information about these NFTs and also about the fellowship program, and anything you have to know and any material we share about Mark's session in the Study Season Information Hub. So this is your central point where you can find any information, recordings, slide decks, GitHub repos, whatever you might need and want to have access to in the course of this live track. I'll drop the link to the chat in a moment. And from there, I think we can start with an introduction. Mark, please introduce yourself. And also, I think everybody would be keen to learn more about what brought you to crypto, what brought you to Carbon DeFi, and now to this offering, this lecture about concentrated liquidity.
Yeah, certainly. So yeah, my name is Mark Richardson. I in a previous life I was an organic synthetic chemist. So I completed my my bachelor at Macquarie University in Sydney, my PhD at the University of Melbourne. I did my first postdoc in California at the University of California, Irvine. And then a second postdoc in the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization, which is like a branch of the Australian government. I was there from 2019 until the end of 2020. In terms of what brought me to cryptocurrency, it's hard to say, but the shift was certainly precipitated by the pandemic, which is I think a familiar story throughout the industry. What had happened was that I had spent about a year preparing for a joint research effort between the Australian and German governments. So I had grant funding to go to the Max Planck Institute of Colloids and Surfaces in Potsdam. And I was supposed to spend about a year there. And my flight out of Australia, I think, was somewhere in like mid-April of 2020. And of course, it was the beginning of April that the Australian government completely shut down all international travel, both into and out of the country. And so this wiped out, the year of preparation work that I had done beforehand, and also meant that my academic career was starting to look like it was going to be a little bit more difficult to maintain, because the sort of work I do was requires access to extremely specific instrumentation and things that you can't necessarily do while working from home. And so during that lockdown period, and this was an especially draconian one for me. So I lived in Melbourne in Australia, which went through about 2 years of lockdown during the pandemic. And so I had a lot of time, at my computer trying to think of, what to pivot my career towards. And I spent a lot of time in cryptocurrency. So I joined several DAOs. I started, speaking with project founders, including Bancors. And so throughout 2020, I was an active DAO member, after the Bancor DAO officially launched in October of 2020. And at the end of that year, the Bancor Foundation asked if I would like to work for them full time. So I started as a contractor in January of 2021. And then, slowly sort of became, it started to increase the level of my contribution to the project, eventually becoming the head of research, then the product architect, and then the project lead. And so I essentially have assumed leadership of the project since October of 2022. And the first thing to do was to build a product that I thought had let's say market fit with respect to the bottom line. So not necessarily the Silicon Valley version of startup culture where you just acquire users at all costs, but rather that the project, should have a self-sustaining philosophy, like sort of hard baked into it. And the answer to that for us is carbon. So carbon is an anagram of Bancor, if you didn't know that already, and it represents a very profound shift in the way that we approach the on-chain market making or decentralized exchange infrastructure. Bancor was the first to develop the automatic market maker back in 2017. And it launched its ICO around that idea. And the project is very proud to be among relatively few from that ICO era that actually committed to what they said that they were going to do and deliver on precisely the mandate that we have. So we are, the ICO used to be a very dirty word. Maybe it still is. But I am very glad of the direction that the project has gone. It has been difficult. The project has been through different iterations of itself. There was something like we had an insurance based AMM design that got bank run by 3 Arrows Capital and Celsius back in at the beginning of the bear market in 2022. And Carbon is a way for us to try and address some of the lingering debt that the protocol still has. Very pleased to report that system seems to be working quite well. So Carbon is, even though that it borrows from a lot of its AMM predecessors in terms of the mathematics and the descriptions that it has, it actually operates in a very profoundly different way, and it allows you to achieve things that people didn't really think were possible with the models that were available. And so I think that it's a good time to now start to reflect on what that theory is. And so my motivation with this series is to maybe make clear or state, I don't want to say state simply because that might be underselling it a little bit, but at least make exhaustive everything that you need to know to understand how any concentrated liquidity protocol functions, and Carbon belongs to this family. And thankfully, there is a relatively clear line of provenance that we are going to follow, throughout this series. And it begins in 2020 with the first description of concentrated liquidity, again by Bancor, and then to the second and most popular description of concentrated liquidity, which is the one by Uniswap v3. And then the third case we're going to look at is the description that Carbon represents. And what I'm going to be showing you is that all three of these things are one and the same object. And it's really a question of implementation and the way that you choose to wield these models that produces the outcome, or actually generates the product that it represents. But yeah, that's my background. So yeah, from essentially seeing my academic career become destroyed by the pandemic, to now leading what I'm very proud to say is like one of the oldest and most influential DeFi protocols in the world. So that's me, and I'm very much looking forward to meeting all of you.
Cool, Mark. Thanks for this introduction. Yeah, oldest protocol sounds good somehow. I like this. Now, you guys probably know that we always run in the first session a tiny introduction round. It's so cool to see that many of you are joining actually several live tracks, and maybe you already introduced yourself somewhere in the live tracks, but Mark haven't had the chance to meet you guys. So let's run another introduction round just to give everybody a first picture of who's in the call. So I ask everyone, if you like, switch on your mic, switch on your video, so that we can briefly introduce each other. I would like to start with Maya. Maya Caddy. Would you be open to introduce yourself briefly? Your background, what brought you here?
Yeah, sure. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you well.
Perfect.
Can hear you
So
fine.
my name is Maya Cadell. Um, I have been in crypto for a little while. So I first entered into crypto in 2016, actually via UBS, ironically, because they had a crypto section, right? And I was interning there, and I was like, this sounds so cool. Almost bought Ethereum back then. Coinbase's UX was really bad, so didn't, and went to Barcelona instead, with that money. So yeah, and I probably re-entered the ecosystem in 2021. I was working at a venture studio and built out a business. As part of that, the business was one of the world's first non-custodial peer-to-peer on and off ramping protocols. And basically scaled that initially in Nigeria, and then since in Kenya, and now it's being pushed globally. And I think, left the larger firm last year, and I've been trying to figure out what I want to do next. As part of this current bull market, I know that one of the big issues is going to be liquidity fragmentation, especially across different L2s. And so I want to have a deeper appreciation for how liquidity actually works and is managed and how to best optimize it. Yeah, so that's kind of what's brought me here.
Great. Thanks, Maya. Welcome on board. Let's see, who should go next? Victor.
Hello. Sorry.
Hello.
Hi, and hi everyone. I have to admit I just finished lunch, so I was a bit in a rush, but I'm actually, my background is so my name is Victor Navas. My background is in biotechnology. I'm an immunologist actually, and I studied molecular biology, so also kind of come from first academia and then worked in the biotech field for some time in industry. And I actually came across all of this. I'm pretty new to this, like in 2021. Also kind of post-pandemic influence, but mainly trying to understand how to scale collaboration globally, particularly facing initially IP issues and really kind of restrictive to a certain industry, to our industry, very restrictive conditions. And yeah, I started to kind of build a business around this, and now I was looking forward to the token engineering courses. I'm new to this, so it's all quite overwhelming, but I'm happy to be here. And yeah, so that's it. Thank you very much.
Well, Victor, thanks for sharing. We were discussing IP topics actually last night, so I would be glad to learn more about what you are working on. But let's put this to an DM discussion maybe. Thanks for the introduction. When would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Hey everyone, this is Wen. I entered crypto world quite late. I have been a product manager with a centralized exchange for 2 years. With a prior background in traditional finance. Now I've decided to go full into Web3. So the first narrative or the area that I look into is the DeFi space, because it's obviously related to what I was doing before joining crypto. I've heard a lot of the words and the explanations somewhere on the internet. Like I try to look it up myself. Like I can understand bits of information, but I think I do like a overall view, especially in terms of how a DEX works. Like what's the tiny mechanism that connects all those concepts? That is something I'm trying to figure out. I feel like this track would definitely help me to understand all these and make me to able to connect all those dots together. So I'm excited to join the team and study with the fellows here, and yeah, just look forward to it.
Awesome. Welcome, Wen. Let's pick two more. T. T, would you introduce yourself? Just switch on your mic. it's okay if you can't at the moment. Also, feel free to drop your social links, LinkedIn, whatever links to the chat. And yeah, so that we can find each other. And okay, CJ, would you like to introduce yourself as well? Maybe.
Yeah, GM guys, can you hear me?
Seems that, okay, we can hear you again. Just go ahead.
Okay, I'm CJ. I'm from Nigeria, and I've been in crypto since 2020, but started actively building as a full stack developer by 2022. And I've been a member of the Build Guild as a full stack developer, and I've just, been building around. It's My purpose for joining the sessions is to, wrap my head around both the everything that is involved in designing these protocols and tokens. So it's been fascinating, and yeah, that's just a short description.
Thanks, CJ. Awesome. Yeah, again, welcome everyone to the study season track 3. Before we dive in, let me finally direct you briefly to Discord. So I hope you're all members of our Discord. Let me pull up our Discord channel. So track 3 with Mark, concentrated liquidity from scratch, has its own Discord channel. We started posting here. So there's the session plan available here as well. Also important links. And there we posted some first questions to get to know each other. So I'd like to invite you now to go to the Discord track 3 channel. Take a look at the introductory questions on mathematics and on your knowledge about exchange systems, and just click the emoji indicating your position or your perspective. We have a lot of people who stated, I studied math a long time ago, but I seldom think about it much. No, we'll think about and talk about math a lot in this track. You'll enjoy it. Number 3, okay. What else? Exchange systems. A lot of people, I do know what the first 3 options mean in terms of DeFi and DEX protocols, but none apply to me. So not too many active users. And what do we have? I use on-chain DEX infrastructure and I know roughly how it works. Okay, that's cool. You'll know a lot more by the end of this live track, promised. And I use on-chain DEX infrastructure and I know exactly how it works. Okay, I see this number grow already. That's cool to see. So this is our shared channel. Make sure to check out the messages there. Feel free to drop your own questions and messages. And with that, I think we are good to go. Stage is yours, Mark. Let's go.
Okay, great. I'm just going to quickly share my screen here. Let's try that. Angela, can you confirm for me that this is working okay?
Yeah, we can see your screen, but we can't see slides at the moment. This is sharing.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, yeah. We are on the PDF.
Okay, good.
Now.
Okay, so I've prepared a textbook of sorts for this course, and I've put this in the Discord. You see, I've also got a GitHub here that I'm waiting to make public so that you can see it there. And so here's the PDF. This is all compiled from a tech file. And so if you're used to using LaTeX and you actually want to harvest some of these equations and things for something else that you're writing or to keep notes or whatever, I think having access to the source code is actually going to be helpful for that. So I will be making this available. The short version is like this is the course textbook. And we're going to be moving through each of these parts basically in chronological order. And so if you want to read ahead, please feel free, but don't think that you need to have read this whole thing by next lecture, or that you should have read everything by now, or something like that. None of that's true. It's really just for you to refer to complement the lecture material. So I don't mind if you just want to use the lectures, but I do think that it's helpful to have something to read with. And so I'm not going to be presenting, this document. I have, dedicated slides that will go over things in a more general way. But I did want to show you something that I've done here that maybe I can ask for your assistance, because with a document this large, this is 85 pages. There's something like 350 equations and 50 figures and things like that. So there's going to probably be some typing errors in it, just because with a document this large there always is. But also there might be some referencing errors. I've tried to catch as many as possible, which is why I didn't publish this until last night. But just for your interest, when we are, when I'm creating these equations, they're obviously enumerated here on the right. So beginning at 1 and going to however many equations there are. But then on the left side, there are like backlinks that will tell you like where this equation came from. So if you're looking at an equation like this one here, and you think, wow, like that's seems like an exotic equation. I wonder how we arrived at at this result. If you click on this number on the left, it will take you to like its immediate predecessor, or a similar equation to sort of get context back. And I've generated the entire document this way, so that essentially you should be able to, no matter where you are, very quickly get back to solid ground if you happen to find yourself lost in where certain equations have come from and what their significance is. So I do think this is going to be an extremely useful document for us, and I'm very happy to accept comments, corrections. Let's call this like the peer review process for this thing. You can just let me know in Discord, or you can email me or whatever, any comments or changes that you would like to make to it. Okay, so let's begin. Angela, can you confirm for me that the slide is presented?
Slide is visible, all good.
Wonderful. Okay. So with introductions out of the way, I knew that we were going to spend a little bit of time, on the preamble. And so I've tried to keep today's lecture relatively short, which is okay, because we've got plenty more. There are 4 other lectures in this course. And for a lot of them, we're probably going to be spending a full 90 minutes on each one. Whereas today, we probably won't need that amount of time. And I've told Angela that I'll keep the 5th lecture, so the last lecture, as short as possible, so that we can use some of that time to celebrate, for example, some of the candidates and stuff like that. So the thing that I really want to get done with this lecture, or with this whole lecture course, is like, it reminds me a little bit, or I'm sort of inspired by Richard Feynman. And there was I saw a lost lecture that was actually discovered by an archivist, I think at Stanford University. And it was on like planetary dynamics and things. And he has this amazing quote right at the beginning of the lecture, which is that I'm going to give you what I call an elementary demonstration. But elementary does not mean that it's easy to understand. Elementary means that very little is required to know ahead of time in order to understand it, except to have an infinite amount of intelligence. And what he means by that is that there should be like no prerequisite, right? The stuff that he's presenting doesn't assume that you are already a scholar in such and such a subject, something like astrodynamics or whatever. And I think DeFi has this problem that when white papers are written and when people write, technical reports and other things, the way that they share it and the way that they talk about it, it has a very, let's say, concise and efficient nomenclature and sort of language surrounding it that does make it efficient, but it also makes it exclusive. And so if you haven't been in the space for a little while, you kind of get left out of the conversation now. And so what I'm trying to do here is to start literally from scratch. But I do have to, it's not that very little is required to know ahead of time. You are going to need something like, a working knowledge of calculus and that kind of thing. But even then, I'm going to try and represent these ideas to you, especially because I know that for many of you, some of these skills are perishable, and if it's been a few years or maybe even longer than that since you've had any opportunity to engage with subject matter like the one that we're going to be presenting, then it might be helpful to be reintroduced to some of these concepts. And so that's what today's lecture is about. We're going to be looking at the tools, the mathematics that you need, and also the unconcentrated liquidity model. And by going through these steps, I think that we'll, at the end of this lecture, have a very good idea of exactly what type of material you're expected to master, and how we're going to apply that to the concentrated liquidity models will become more evident as we get into those lectures. So by the end of this course, you're going to understand what this object is. Right? This is essentially the graphic of concentrated liquidity. And for people that already know a lot about concentrated liquidity, this graphic has like a lot of information in it. There have been several presentations of something like this. There's more than one way to draw such an object, but I think this is the one that I like the most. And so if what you're seeing on the screen is like deeply mysterious, or if you've never seen this before, or if you feel intimidated because there seems to be a lot happening here, don't be. I promise you, we're going to go through this. Like, there are a very large number of steps to arrive at this thing, but each one of them is learnable, even if you don't have a strong background in mathematics or DeFi or anything else. So literally from scratch, let's talk about this Cartesian plane. In DeFi, and especially with bonding curves and exchange primitives, it's important to recognize that the X and Y axes refer to something very specific, usually. And we'll come back to that point in, I think, lecture 3. And that is that one of these axes represents a literal token balance, and the other axis represents, again, a literal token balance, but a different token to the other one. So these are numbers of tokens, and they're numbers of tokens inside a smart contract that we call a liquidity pool. Now, that means that when we're doing sort of the theoretical explanation or the theoretical exploration of these concepts, we assume that X and Y are some real number, or any real number, or any, sorry, I should say any real non-negative and non-zero real number. And that's fine. And we will be making that, let's say, concession in pretty much all of the work that we do. But there will be times where I am going to point out that there are discrepancies between what we handle theoretically and what actually happens in practice. And here we run into our very first example of that, which is that real numbers are completely incompatible with computers. Right? You need an infinite amount of memory to handle the reals. And Ethereum, most of the slots are only 256 bits. And you need to pack a lot of information into each of these slots. So even then, you can't even use all 256 bits necessarily to represent a single number. And even if you could, you're still only going to be using rational numbers to represent X and Y. And it's worth thinking from time to time whether or not the concession that we've made, where the theory was developed exclusively in the real numbers, but actually we're going to be dealing exclusively with rational numbers, makes a difference. Like, what is the cost of that when it comes to performing, to utilizing the theory that was established in a context that we're not even going to use. And I'm posting this as essentially a rhetorical question for now, but it is important. This is going to be one of the persistent themes throughout all 5 of the lectures. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to choose any point on this chart, and this is going to be starting token balances. Okay, and this point is, I'm going to call X naught and Y naught. And it's not incidental, like which point we choose. Like, it's going to have a specific meaning. But we'll come back to that in just a minute. After we've chosen this point, you're going to draw this curve through it. Okay, so we're basically saying that all points where the X dimension multiplied by the Y dimension is equal to the product of the two first token balances are allowed points. And this creates an implicit curve. And that implicit curve is where we're going to do most of our work. Now we need to do some algebraic rearrangement of this implicit curve expression already. And we're going to slowly work up to a more sophisticated description of this thing. So I want you to just take a minute right now to just look at this equation and how innocuous it looks. It seems so unassuming. There's only 4 terms in it. And even then, because X naught and Y naught are constant, you can actually combine Y naught and X naught into a single constant like K, which is very common. If you've heard of the X times Y equals K bonding curve, then this is exactly the same thing. The reason I want you to remember this equation now is because the elaborations that we're going to do with it, without really introducing anything else, are going to start to look a little frightening. And I think it's worth remembering that this is your home button, right? If you start to get lost in the derivations, you can always come back and look at this equation and how friendly and familiar it is. And it's not just the equations that we're going to do on this slide, or even in this lecture, but over all of the lectures in this series. Essentially, everything starts from this really unassuming point. And no matter how elaborate or sophisticated the mathematics gets, just remember that it all begun right here. And this contains almost all the information that we need to do those elaborations and further derivations. So the easiest things to do here is to isolate X and Y, which is simple. We just divide the right-hand side by Y. We can also flip the Y and X to make Y the subject. Now we've got 3 different representations of exactly the same mathematical idea. Now the rule is, that I said before, anyone can change the token balances so long as this predicate is observed. So how the smart contract works is it has token balances inside it, and it says anyone with access to me, like anyone with a connected wallet, is allowed to adjust these token balances so long as these mathematical equations remain true. So what might that look like? Here is a token swap, or actually many token swaps. And all I'm doing is showing you that we can start at any point on the curve and arrive at any other point on the curve. And it doesn't matter how big or how small this, that traversal is. As long as both the beginning point and the final point are legitimate points on this implicit curve, then that is a legitimate token swap. And the smart contract will allow you to perform that action. And that is essentially the crux of, decentralized exchanges. That you have you have an implicit curve that tells you all of the exchanges that people are allowed to participate in, and then it's up to them to choose how they want to interact. Now, this is where the equations are going to start getting a little bit more sophisticated, because that traversal upon the implicit curve can be represented with this, delta x and delta y symbol that I'm using as a single symbol, by the way. So this is not delta times x. This is literally like delta x, meaning some change in x. And so if you wanted to capture that predicate sort of within the algebra, what we're saying is that whatever the change in x is has to be coupled with some change in y such that that constant term remains the same. And so all I've done is to take the x and y terms that we had on the left and add that delta, add that delta to them to capture that traversal implicitly. Now we can start to rearrange this, because what we really want to do with these equations is to isolate just the delta x or just the delta y in terms of the other one, so that we can compute what a token swap would actually look like. And what I've done here, if I can just go back a step, see here I've got the x plus dx and y plus dy on the left side. If I subtract off that dimension, I've already got a very easy calculation, right? If I know x and I know y, and I know x naught and y naught, and I know delta y, then this is something that I can easily calculate. But it's referring to two different dimensions simultaneously. And there's actually a way that we can simplify that, because we already have x described in terms of x naught, y naught, and y, and we already have y described in terms of x naught, y naught, and x. And so if I substitute those x and y terms out for their description in terms of the other constants, I can actually remove an entire dimension from that calculation. And this is interesting, because now the number of variables that I need to store has gone down. And more than that, the way that this equation is presented actually seems to refer to or seems to point to a very specific mathematical operation that I think is going to come up in just a minute. But yeah, the point is that if we know just the y coordinate, and we know the amount of y either being increased or decreased from that point, and we know the beginning constants x naught and y naught, we can calculate delta x. And we don't need to know what x is. We can do it exclusively from just the other token balances reference frame. And the same is true in reverse. For delta y, we can refer exclusively to the x coordinate and still calculate the amount of tokens that we need to either put in or take out of the liquidity pool with reference only to the change in the other token balance, which is interesting. But yeah, this, whenever you see something like this, whenever you see a subtraction between two different terms, where the only difference is some delta in the first one, then your mind should immediately start to suspect that this is an integration, or that an integration has been performed. And this is one of the elaborations that we're going to be exploring in this lecture. And it's also why I think that these swap formulas are the best to study, right? If you're brand new to DeFi and you're brand new to the kinds of mathematics that we're doing here, then these are the swap formulas that I would prefer that you write down on your notes and look at from time to time. Because the more familiar ones, while they're more compact and maybe more computationally efficient, they also are more abstract, right? They are much farther away from the processes from which they came. And I will show you all of that in the slides to come. Okay, so first things first. These equations are nice, but obviously they can be simplified. And so I've skipped a couple of steps here, but that's okay. I'm just trying to I'm trying to combine the minuend and subtrahend here into a single fraction. And then you'll note that if I go back a step here, that x naught, y naught part that's now highlighted in green, we already know from that simple formula that we began with at the start, that is equal to x times y, right? That is a literal identity for that thing. And so we can actually substitute x naught, y naught for just x times y, which allows us to cancel either the y term from the numerator and the denominator in the first case, or the x term in the second case, which allows this swap formula to really condense down into something quite attractive. And this is very, very close to the most common representation of the swap equations that you're likely to see in the DeFi literature. So this is, for example, featured in, I'm pretty sure it's featured in the Uniswap v2 white paper. You'll see it everywhere. Some version of this is even in the Balancer white paper. The original Bancor patent has something similar to this inside it. However, what all of those examples have when they present this equation it is an assumption that this is going to be a positive number. Whereas here, we've actually put in or we have arrived at, through mathematical and algebraic operations, a conclusion that this actually should be negated. And so it's worth checking if we're right? How can all of the DeFi literature leave out this negative sign when we have done this process carefully and discovered that that negative sign should be there? So let's think about why that is, and if we have made a mistake or if we should change our approach. It should be relatively simple to convince yourself that the change in X and the change in Y are always in the opposite directions, right? The closest that you can get to having two positive numbers is actually when they're both zero. So then they're not both positive numbers in that case, right? They're both zero. And as this X arrow is showing here, when this is a number greater than zero, right? So when this is a positive number, it doesn't really matter where you are on the curve. The Y arrow is always going to be pointing down, right? We're always going to be going to smaller Y values. So if this delta X value is greater than zero, then the delta Y value has to be less than zero. And the opposite then must be true. If we reverse these arrows and Y is going to a higher value, then this means that we have to be moving left, right, to lower values on the X scale. And it doesn't matter, right? You can choose any point on this curve, and it would be clear that that pattern is always going to be observed. So our negation is not a mistake, right? We're definitely right. It makes intuitive sense, and we can just inspect the curve that we've already drawn to prove that to ourselves. So if it's correct, why isn't it used, right? Why do people choose to leave this out? There's not one answer to this, but there is a very common optimization just in software engineering about using unsigned integers that I think I can refer to just quickly. So it's not this simple, but I think that this will point you sort of in the right direction if this is the first time you've had to contend with these kinds of concepts. This is a 32-bit number. And the largest unsigned integer it can represent is going to be 2 to the 32 minus 1. So if all of those things are ones, then that would be the binary representation of, 4,294,967,295, which is fine, like relatively big number. But I want you to think, what would happen if we had to sacrifice just one of those bits, right? If we needed to change the first bit from representing a number to representing a sign, right? And usually the MSB convention is that if it's a 0 at the front, then it's non-negative, and if it's a 1 at the front, then it's a negative number. But this means that we now only have 31 bits to represent our number with. And so the actual absolute value, the magnitude of numbers that we can represent actually drops by 50%, right? Instead of having numbers that we can represent up to 4 billion, we can now only represent numbers up to 2 billion, which is a pretty significant drop. And every bit that you sacrifice will drop that number by another 50%, right? Just because we're dealing with powers of 2. And so this is just an example. It's obviously there are better reasons than this, and signed integers can be problematic for all sorts of reasons. But this is one of the most famous and I think the most accessible demonstrations for why you don't want to use negative numbers in code. You want all of your numbers to always be positive, and you want to treat them as being always positive. And then you want to, if you know that a subtraction is happening somewhere, then there should be a function somewhere that makes it negative by performing a subtraction. So this is another way of saying, when you're writing good code, especially in a smart contract situation, you're always subtracting positive numbers You're never adding negative numbers. I think that that's clear. So this is why you'll hear me refer to, especially in the textbook that I've written for you, a moving frame of reference. Because in the context that we've looked at, we're only looking at the token balances from the perspective of the smart contract. But remember, the person who's interacting with it, they also have token balances, right, in their wallet. And if the token balances are going down in the smart contract, then that means that that same token balance must be going up for the user that's interacting with it. So there's always a positive number somewhere for you to find, well, at least in an exchange case. So if you know that the positive number that is, that it's being executed against the liquidity pool represents a trade of some value, then rather than having a negative number that refers to how much the liquidity pool loses, instead, the number that you're talking about is now the tokens that are being distributed to the user, right? The amount of tokens that the user is receiving. So you can always find a way to sort of gel this, but it's unfortunate because it means that a lot of the literature has kind of forgotten that they're making this assumption, or the assumption that the reader knows that they've made the simplification for these kinds of reasons. So implementation and theory are very much different things. And again, I will continue to harp on this point as we move forward.
Mark,
and
there has been
yes,
one question in the chat, because some people seem to struggle with why can you suddenly easily add a minus in the formula. Can you repeat that again? So I think the slide beforehand. Yeah, here. And feel free to switch on your mic, Nati, and ask.
Yeah,
What's the
thank
point?
you so much. Yeah, the question is crystal clear for me. What really confused me, let's say, it's the example you mentioned later about the bits example. How or why the negative is a problem, or how this is affecting, and we need to remove that sign from the equation. That's the part where I got lost. Sorry.
Sure. Okay, fine. Yeah, the point that I'm making is that it is the convention, not just in smart contracts, but in a lot of embedded systems, to use only positive numbers. There's no such thing as a negative number. And that's and one of the reasons for that is that if you're using negative numbers, you have to represent that the sign of the number that you're using somehow, and that means that you need to sacrifice a bit. And when you sacrifice that bit to represent either the plus sign or the minus sign, that means that the magnitude of the number that you can actually use drops by 50%. So in this particular case, if we're using a 32-bit unsigned integer, we can represent numbers all the way up to 4 billion. But if we're using a 32-bit signed integer, we can only represent numbers with magnitudes up to 2 billion, because we only have 31 bits actually representing value, and one of those bits is just representing a sign. Is that clear or no?
Yeah, now it's much clearer. So it's a matter of using one bit just for representing the sign and how this is affecting the result. At the end, what you will have, it's like a mirror curve, because you are removing the sign, but you will have the same delta, but the effect will be the opposite one.
Yeah, exactly. So the point that I'm making is that there is this error that is like in the DeFi literature, where they will, we'll look at a couple more examples where people say, oh, the derivative of this function is y over x, when it's actually quite clearly negative y over x. But why do they say that, right? And we'll talk about that in a minute. And then it's the same thing for our swap functions, right? They will present these swap functions. They will present the swap functions like this one over here on the right, without the negative sign, because they are representing the equations in exactly the same way that the smart contract is using them. And so when the smart contract is computing like delta x, that function will already know if this is a number that should be subtracted to or added to a token balance. And this means that you get to keep, in our 32-bit number case, you get to keep the full magnitude of the number that you wanted, because the function itself knows to perform the subtraction, which gives you back that negative sign.
Cool.
Am I
Confirmed.
explaining?
Looks
confirmed?
good. I hope, Maya, this was cool for you as well. Otherwise, we'll go over. Yeah. Okay, perfect. We can go ahead, Mark. Thanks for the
Yeah, and that's fine. And like, I think as that's probably a good time to just say that with anything that we're covering, like, I'm very happy to do like an office hours or something. So if anyone it got stuck on anything that I was speaking about, or if my explanation was unsatisfactory for any reason, please feel free to contact me. Like, it could be that many other people are in the same position that you are, and we can just do a friendly call to try and resolve it, get to the bottom of it. So thank you so much, Maya, for raising it. And if it was still not satisfactory, just let me know, and we can go over it again. Okay, so the point that I'm making is that theory and implementation are not the same thing. And when you are implementing something, this is when the engineering aspect of what we study becomes much more prevalent. Obviously, the focus of like this lecture series is going to be almost entirely on the theory, but I will make these like little implementation notes as we go, especially because I think that it's something that doesn't get enough attention in general. Although if you look hard, you can still find some pretty good contributions from the DeFi builders on these kinds of topics. Okay, so the equations on the right of the slide right now for the token swap, these are the most common, and I think because they are the nicest to look at. They're very compact. Again, the computational overhead for these is extremely small. And if you stare at them long enough, you can convince yourself that you only need to store X and Y in memory in order to do this computation, because one of the other variables is coming from the person performing the swap at the time that they're performing it. So the equations on the left, while they represent exactly the same thing, they're less common and they're less nice. They're slightly bigger. The magnitudes of the numbers that are going into these calculations is slightly larger because we've got a product of a product in the numerator, and this means that you might run into things like overflow issues, right? If you only have 128 or 256 bits of runtime memory, you do need to keep track of how big that number in the numerator is getting. And you'll note that the equations on the right of the slide, they only have delta y times x or delta x times y. Whereas on the left, we've got a much larger product, delta y times x naught times y naught, or delta x times x naught times y naught. So there's a good reason why the familiar ones, the common ones, are presented, because they are an obvious choice from the implementation perspective. But again, from a pedagogical perspective, the equations on the left, I think, are much more preferable. They have a lot more sort of self-knowledge of the processes that generated them, and they're a lot less abstract. All right, let's start with the nice equations first. And we're going to derive a couple of really important identities. And we're going to, this is going to be a formal calculus process, but I'm going to try and do it without referring to any of the calculus rules. So we're going to do this from first principles. So the first thing to note here is that if delta x is a certain number of tokens that are being, let's say, swapped into the pool, then delta y is the number of tokens that are coming out of that pool. This is the same as saying, delta x might be dollars and delta y might be cheeseburgers. And you can work out like how many, how much a cheeseburger costs by comparing the amount of dollars that you paid versus the number of cheeseburgers you received. And so dividing through by the opposite delta variable will give you an effective price equation. This also doesn't receive a huge amount of attention in the DeFi literature, but this is probably the most important price equation that exists. Specifically for DEXs, because it's the slippage adjusted price equation. The one that most people are familiar with is the is the marginal price equation, and that's going to come up in just a second. But just note for a second here that this will quote you the price of any trade that you want to do, right? For any delta Y or for any delta X, for any number of tokens that you're trying to buy from the curve, so long as it has them, and for any number of tokens that you're trying to sell into the curve, which can be up to infinity. This will generate an actual, an actual price. It quotes you a price, no matter what number you choose. Again, it has to be a rational number, but whatever. So these are important functions. But they are the price quotes for any non-zero trader quantity. What we refer to as the marginal rate is that same number, but when the delta X and delta Y values are getting closer and closer to zero. And this is, again, coming up on sort of the Leibniz definition of the derivative. So if we take that delta Y and we take that delta X and we continuously drive them closer and closer to zero, we can start to ask the question, what does that number approach? And it should be pretty clear that if delta Y and delta X are just tiny, tiny amounts, very, very close to zero, an infinitesimal amount, that this price equation will simplify to just X over Y or Y over X negated. And so I'm using this this notation again because I'm trying to assume that you don't know how to differentiate something using the rote memory rules that you might have learned in high school or first year university or something. Whereas this process, I feel, is much more intuitive and it's every bit as robust. In fact, I would say that this is more rigorous a way to derive the derivative than just applying something like the power rule is, or doing implicit differentiation. But we can do implicit differentiation if we want to. And so if you haven't seen how that works before, this is how to do it. You essentially take the derivative of both sides, and then after a little bit of rearrangement, you can get to exactly the same result. So it does generate the same thing. I'm just showing that if the steps associated with taking the derivative of an implicit curve were previously unknown to you, that's okay. You can still get to the result just by applying normal sort of calculus intuition, even if you've forgotten these rules from decades ago. Okay, so quick revision. These equations tell you how much money or how many tokens, how much stuff you're going to get for trading another amount of a different thing, right? So X is one token balance, Y is the other token balance. Delta X and delta Y are the change that you're trying to make. So usually you're trying to calculate one of these deltas with respect to another delta that's already given, right? So I want to sell 20 cheeseburgers. How much money can I get? Or I want to buy 20 cheeseburgers. How much money is that going to cost me? When you compare those two values together, you get the actual price that you paid, right? The effective price. And this is the one that you should care about because it's the one that you experienced. But if you want to know what the current price is or the market price, this is the price where the price that you will be quoted so long as you're not going to take it, right? So long as no one trades at that price, then that's the price. So you might hear me refer to this as the instantaneous rate of exchange because I learned calculus in sort of a physics context. And so that's still how I choose to think about these things. And I think in this case, it still makes sense, right? It's the very first infinitesimal trade that you got when so long as you're trading such a small amount that slippage becomes negligible. And that's what we call the marginal rate of exchange, or the instantaneous rate of exchange. Okay, different ways to represent this graphically. The effective exchange rate is just a secant line that's drawn between the initial point and the final point on the curve that's representing the traversal that you're trying to achieve. So you can see I've drawn that here just as a broken dashed line between these 2 points. The marginal rate of exchange, however, is a tangent line at any one of those points. But you can't represent it with a swap. So there's no arrows here because the only way the marginal price kind of exists is if you're moving a zero distance away from that point. And so you'll see me draw these kinds of curves with, generally with points highlighting the actual touch point, the kissing point between the tangent line and the curve itself. And then the tangent line will be represented with these kinds of broken lines. Okay, let's do that process now for the things that I said I think have more pedagogical value. So these are the simplified swap equations. So all I've done is to combine the minuend and subtrahend of the other two equations that we've got there in order to get it into a single quotient. Again, we can divide one of these delta variables by the other delta variable to get an effective price equation. And then we can ask the question, what happens when we let one of those delta variables get arbitrarily close to zero? And that means that we start to approximate this, okay? Or it starts to get very close to this marginal rate expression. And then, of course, y times y, x times x is just y squared and x squared. Now, you could have done this just using the power rule as before. We already know that x is equal to x naught times y naught over y. And whenever you've got a division by the variable that you're trying to differentiate with respect to, that's the same as having its power to the a negative value. And so here, that's actually x naught times y to the negative one. And then just taking the negative one and putting that down the front, subtracting one gives you exactly the same result as the one that we've just derived without having to refer to this rule at all. So I'm not necessarily advocating for the fact that you should ignore these rules. Obviously, they're very helpful sort of shortcuts, but I do think that kind of rote learning approach, it does start to erode the intuition that you have for what these operations actually mean and what they do. Because we're not just calculating numbers here, we're actually engaging with theory. And I think that having an intuition for it is much more important than how fast you can compute something. Now, the opposite of differentiation is integration. And again, this is much more difficult to do from first principles, and I can recommend a lot of really great material on YouTube that makes this a little bit more clear. But what I'm trying to show you here is that when you take the derivative thus derived and perform those integration steps, you actually end up with that swap equation that I showed you right at the beginning of this lecture in exactly the form that we still have it in, right? So that swap equation, it's already sort of in the format of the as like representing an integration of the marginal price formula as we've just derived it. And so the point here is that the swap equations are the definite integrals of the marginal rate equations evaluated over some interval. And of course they are, I'm not trying to make you think that this is a profound realization or something. But it kind of is something important to acknowledge. These come from each other in some way, and they're both describing one and the same mathematical object. And recall, right, at the beginning of this lecture, I said, remember how small that equation was? X times y times x naught times y naught. And look at where we are now already, right? And this is all coming from that one object, and we're going to keep going. This keeps growing and growing. But we haven't changed anything. We haven't added anything new to this. We're just analyzing and unpacking exactly what that equation refers to.
Mark, if we can stop for a moment, Tiago dropped a comment in the chat with another way of looking at it. Tiago, do you want to briefly explain?
Yeah, sure. I just want to make a really quick comments. Because when we are talking about AMMs, we're talking about discrete time difference equations, right? So it's time 0 right now, and then after trade, it becomes time 1. And so what he was trying to tell at the beginning was that when you have those really simple equations, x, y equals to an invariant, he's just trying to turn them into iterative maps, which is equations that repeat themselves in the new results. So it's x1 equals to the function that takes x0, so on and so on. That was just it. It was just my comment. Just trying to help understand.
Yeah, Yeah, it's a wonderful comment. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Yeah. Okay. Where was I? Yeah. Okay. These all refer to one and the same thing. And it's, from an implementation perspective, obviously some of these formulas are much more attractive than some of the other ones. But from a learning and a theory perspective, to each their own. And so what I'm trying to give you here is sort of sufficient background, sufficient ammunition that you are free to explore the connections between these things, so that when we derive some of the more complicated concentrated derivative functions, concentrated liquidity functions, that the operations and the intuition that we're applying there is going to be exactly the same as the intuition that we've applied here. So in a way, it doesn't get any more complicated than what we've done. But the equations do start to get larger, and you'll start to see other frightening symbols start to appear. Things like square roots. I know that makes a lot of people very uncomfortable. They're going to show up. But in terms of the actual way that we're approaching these things, it's all the same. So if you can master all of the stuff that we've been going through on this lecture before the next lecture, you're going to be extremely well equipped to handle, lectures 2 to 5. And if you're struggling with any of these concepts, then maybe give me a call and we can, sort it out. Because my expectation is that at least the stuff that we presented up to this slide is going to be status quo for the group. And I kind of need that to be true before I can move on with the stuff that I really wanted to talk about with this lecture series. Now, I do want to show you one other thing, which is that it should be possible if we've already established that those swap equations are the the integrated forms of these price intervals over some of the marginal price formulas over some price interval. Then we should be able to get those swap equations from the marginal price equations by integrating them. And you often will find that people have never tried to integrate something like this before. It's not super difficult, but if you approach it in a naive way, you will make a mistake. So you cannot, for example, just integrate the right side of this equation with respect to x, because x and y vary together. And so the only way to do this is to actually separate these variables into on either side of the equality before performing the integration. Now, this is a lot of work. Well, I mean, it's not a lot of work, but it's a lot more work compared to some of the other derivations that we've already had. And so I'm going to show you how to do it. And then we're probably just never going to revisit this ever again, but it's a useful skill to have, especially because, like I said, the compactness and the brevity of the equations that you typically get out of a DeFi white paper will probably combine the two token balances like this in a price function that they're giving you, and they may not even give you the bonding curve because they assume that you know how to integrate it yourself. So I'm going to show you how to do that right now. Okay, so first things first, you have to separate the del x and del y components and the x and y components and move those to either side of the equality. Once you've got those things separated, you can integrate both sides as you would normally would, right? So this is not really complicated, it's just long. So hopefully it comes as no surprise that the integration of 1 over x and 1 over y is going to be the natural log of that variable. If that's something that you've perhaps forgotten once, that's okay. There are hundreds of YouTube videos that explain why this is true, but just don't be tempted to try and use the inverted power rule, because it doesn't work for -1. So now that we got the natural log of y from y to y plus dy, or sorry, delta y, is equal to the negative log of x from x to x plus delta x, we can then properly evaluate that logarithm and then exploit the properties of the logarithm in order to combine these into a quotient, which is helpful because it means that we can then cancel that logarithm on either side. And now we're getting sort of, close to home. This is starting to already look familiar. If we rearrange this to make y plus delta y the subject and then just subtract y from the other side, then this is actually, I think, in a form that we've already seen. if we then if we take out y as a common factor, and then substitute the 1 here for x plus dx so that we can combine this into a single fraction, and then allow these x's to cancel by expanding that out, we get to here, and then it's just a simple matter of moving the negative sign out to the front. So I know that that was a lot of steps, but that is how you do that integration. That is how you prove that this price function is related to this swap equation. That if and only if symbol is probably not the right symbol to put there. I apologize for that. But you know what I'm saying, right? The only way that this swap, the only marginal price equation that swap function could have come from is this negative y over x and vice versa. Okay, we're getting very close to the end here. So we've now proven that when you integrate the marginal price equations, you get to the swap equations in both, on both extremes, either the ones that I think are more pleasant to deal with from a study perspective, or the ones that are a little bit more compact and better from an implementation perspective. Same thing, you get the same results. What we haven't looked at yet is what that graph looks like. We've looked at the bonding curve before, but this is now what I call the price curve. And the price curve is the thing that we're integrating over. And this is a signed area. So one of the things I want you to pay attention to here, and this is also true in the textbook materials that I prepared, is that the y-axis here is del y on del x. And note that the top of this axis is a 0, and this is heading down towards negative infinity. So we're below the origin here. And so this area that we are measuring is between is above the curve and below the x-axis. And this is a signed area. This is a negative number. And so from here, we can find the initial marginal rate, which is going to be some value here on the y. We can find the final marginal rate, and we can measure a distance along the x dimension that we have integrated over. And that area in the middle there, that gray shaded area, literally is delta y. And if you haven't seen that before, there are a lot of really great YouTube videos that explain how things like distance can actually be an area if you integrate under like an acceleration curve or under a speed curve or something like that. This is essentially that same process, just applied to token swaps. Okay, so there's our delta y. Okay, so these are the two, like I'd say, most important objects describing any exchange system. And so you'll find that there's while the constant product sort of establishing theory has been like mostly adopted by the rest of the industry, there are other options. So the Bancor formula is like very, very, very prevalent. But people like all projects, I should say, like Dodo, like Curve, they've got a very interesting invariant equation. The one from Andre Cronje, Solidly, also has this really cool sort of cubic polynomial that they use as an invariant function. So there are lots and lots of different options. It's not always this, but this is the most common one, and it has been since 2017. So but the point is that both of these are describing exactly the same thing. That area on the left in the price curve is the same thing as that downwards pointing arrow on the right. Right? In a sense, the bonding curve, or what we call a bonding curve, probably should call it an implicit curve. It is the integrated form of the price curve, right? These are referring to one and the same thing. They are just looking at it from slightly different perspectives. The value of the bonding curve is you get to look at both token balances in at a glance. But with the price curve, you get to look at only one token balance, but you also get its price at a glance. Whereas the bonding curve doesn't give you the price. So you have to make a sacrifice, right? If you've only got 2 dimensions on which to show data, you have to choose. Do you want to show balances for both dimensions, or do you just want to choose one dimension to show a balance and use the other dimension to show some other piece of information like the price? But don't ever make the mistake of thinking that these are referring to something other than each other, right? They are one and the same thing. So that's going to be the end of this lecture, essentially. And for the rest of the series, I really need to, or I would prefer, I don't want to say need to because I don't want to alienate anyone, but I'm going to try to make the assumption that a lot of the things that we've done here today are just taken for granted, that you're at least partly comfortable with it. You don't need to be like a master of it. Like no one's asking you to, write a thesis on anything that we've done here. But at least intuitively, I want you to understand the processes that we've done. So if it means that you need to go back and watch the recording, if you want to talk to me longer about any of the things that we've done, that's also fine. But it just means that we can move through the rest of the material much, much faster if you really try to internalize what we've been through on this lecture. And so to really sort of hit that home, I do have a first homework assignment for you, which is I want you to draw a price curve and bonding curve pair. And you can do this using any software you like. I imagine a lot of people are familiar with things like Excel. I think Excel is a terrific software package, despite the hate that it gets. But if you're a developer, maybe you're more familiar with something like Matplotlib. Desmos is also really terrific. Whatever, I don't really care. Just try and draw some of these functions out and include these annotations. Annotate the price curve with the initial and final marginal rates, right? Which is very similar to what I did before, except that I actually left off what the marginal prices are in terms of the in terms of their numerics. So I'm doing everything completely symbolically. This exercise, I want you to actually do it numerically. I want to see the numbers so I can verify that you've drawn the right thing. Annotate the price curve with the initial and final token balance as well. And remember, this is only one dimension that you have access to. So it's not for both token balances, it's just for one. I don't care if it's the X or Y axis. You can even call it something else. If you wanted to call it ETH or USDC or BTC, that's fine as well. Annotate the bonding curve with the initial and final token balances, which should be easy. And then I want you to include these trade arrows that sort of denote exactly which direction the trade is happening in and which token balances are being changed in what direction. And then I want you to add this caption, right? So these graphs depict a token swap performed for a system initially comprising some number of this token and some number of the other token, where TKNX is increased or decreased by this number, the swap amount, and then the other balance is increased or decreased by the other swap amount, right? The delta Y and the delta X components of the calculations that you're doing here. I also want you to put in the caption what the initial marginal rate is and what the final marginal rate is. And this is something that you don't necessarily have to write that on. I mean, that's going to be annotated to the price curve, but I also want it in the caption. And you can use, like I said, any software you like, but I want you to send me like all of the work. So don't just like produce an image and send me like a PNG or something like that. If you're doing it in Excel, send me the spreadsheet. If you made it in Matplotlib, send me, the .py file or the .ipynb file. If you're doing it in Desmos, send me the link. It doesn't really matter. I want to see like how you've gone about drawing these things. And I think that the process will be good because it means that you have to engage with essentially everything that we've discussed in this lecture. But it also kind of forces you to do something with it, right? To have a goal of like applying some of these concepts and creating something. And so I'm hoping that by next lecture we can have a look at some of the plots and what people have created, and then we'll be on relatively solid ground, I think, to spring into describing how to concentrate these things and what concentrating or amplifying these liquidity curves even means. If you want to talk to me, Telegram, Discord is fine. Actually, probably the Discord server and specifically the track 3 discussion group that we have there is probably going to be the best place to start. But you can feel free to reach out to me at any of these locations. I don't mind which you use. And that concludes today's lecture. I think that is, coming right up on time. So we didn't quite exhaust the 90 minutes allocated to us. So it's good. But you should expect that with the other lectures, we probably will exhaust the 90-minute time frame that's been allocated. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'm happy to invite any questions. We've still got like 6 minutes before the schedule is completely up.
Yeah, a lot of great comments. Thank you. Amazing. Great session. Yui. Thanks for these comments. I think one question from Pedro. Oh, no, thank you. Quick question on studying efficiently. I keep trying to compare AMMs to how market makers in traditional finance operate. Pedro, would you like to switch on your mic briefly?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I know it's a whole different thing, but also there are parallels. And I keep trying to relate like what would be the equivalent of the equations on traditional market making of operating. Do you think that does it make sense at this point to think like this and compare, or I should focus on the equations and then maybe compare to traditional finance?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Give me one moment here.
Great.
So,
thank you for this.
Yeah, no problem. So I wrote a thing at the end of last year that's kind of hovering around at least some of the concepts that you've kind of touched on there. So this is what I've tried to do here is basically I'm trying to find a place where a market has already been made for something, and then translate it into the language of bonding curves, right? To show that there's like fundamentally no difference between these things.
Exactly. That's
so what I
that's my aim.
Yeah, exactly. So this is where I think that you should you should probably check this out. But yeah, one of the graphs that you may find useful is so one of the best ways to think about these things is like as a depth chart. Okay, so here what I've done is to take the all of the PlayStations that I found listed on eBay, and I've kind of marked out their prices, and then what we're getting here is basically the asking depth of the market, right? These are all the eBay vendors that have got asking prices on the consoles that they're selling. And so what we're looking at is, okay, how much of this market can you buy? And up to what marginal price? So if you wanted to buy a certain like 30 consoles, it might cost you $131,000 or something. But the point is that this is a kind of like integration. You can smooth that out like this. So this is got the listing price on the x-axis and the cumulative depth of the market on the y-axis. But if you wanted to, you could draw this as the total PlayStation 5 eBay merchant cash balance versus their PlayStation inventory. And you'll see that this has a very sort of gentle curve to it. This is actually a little bit closer to being parabolic, whereas it's a hyperbola in our case. But the same points apply, right? So I can take this eBay market for PlayStation 5s and ask the question, how many PlayStations can I buy up to and including a certain price, right? Up to a certain marginal price. And so this is that swap, right? This is exactly the same, even the same visual intuition that I've drawn on the things that you saw today. So we've got, Delta Australian dollars here is 131,126. And the PlayStation 5s that are coming out is negative 127. So this is literally using eBay as a liquidity pool, or describing eBay as a liquidity pool.
Awesome.
And so you may find this may help you to develop that kind of intuition. I want to distinguish that though from the actual market making algorithms that people use in a centralized sense. And so this is verging on like high frequency trading and that sort of thing.
Okay.
And that's very bespoke, right? AMMs are actually trying to describe a market, right? They're trying to model like any market. They're not necessarily trying to game the market. They're not necessarily trying to, outperform the market or anything like this. They are just a computer program that allows markets to exist. So whereas selfishly motivated market makers, which is all of them, have a very specific goal in mind, which is, their own bottom line. AMMs weren't really designed with that sort of process in mind.
Yeah, no, awesome. So that because my thought is like, how come AM just were invented with DeFi, but they weren't. They exist, right? They just were formalized. But thank you very much.
Yeah.
I need to dive into, but it makes more sense now.
Yeah, so the answer to that question is the AMM was invented to allow cryptocurrencies to have markets irrespective of whether or not Binance decided to let them be listed, right? So in a perfect world, right, if Binance and Coinbase and OKX and all of these other players, if they just said, you know what, every coin gets listed, right? We accept all coins. And every single market maker said, you know what? We will make sure that there's liquidity for all of these coins. We will put up our own capital to make sure that people can exchange these things. The AMM would never have needed to exist. No one would have even thought to make it. But Binance doesn't do that, and market makers don't do that. And so we had to develop a way to make these things work in lieu of Binance and Coinbase and market makers offering to assist us. So it's trying to literally decentralize that process so that, these large organizations and very well-equipped, let's say, those with greater advantage over the markets don't necessarily get to dictate what becomes successful and what doesn't become successful, and so on and so forth, right? It goes back to sort of the cypherpunk nature of Ethereum. Remember, Bancor is a very old project.
Yeah, no, awesome. Thank you. We'll take a look at the Medium.
Sure, no problem. I can send that. I'll put that in the. I'll put the link in our chat here.
Mm-hmm. We posted.
Someone posted.
Oh, you did already.
Yeah. And we'll collect these materials. Fabi will make sure to collect the materials and make it available in the Study Season Information Hub. In case you find anything that might be related, good to know that you'd like to share, everyone, feel free to drop links in the Discord as well. I mean, this is about sharing knowledge, sharing perspectives. Thanks everyone in advance. Now, yeah, this question came up already on Discord and now a couple of times in the chat. Mark, which chapters from the PDF do you recommend to reach for each upcoming sessions? Can you give us like a list, chapters per sessions? Because there are some people on Discord as well who want to know and follow async.
Yeah. Okay. So I think, and that's a very reasonable request. I should have done that already. Okay. So yeah, I think for today, there was no pre-reading necessary, because I think that it was introductory and we wanted to sort of settle down together. But what I would like is for everyone to have read up to at least page 30. So try to get through the first 3 sections. Let's make sure that I get that right. Yeah, so up to the first half of page 30, I think would be perfect. I'll write that in the Discord immediately after this.
Okay. Cool. And we'll share the recording plus a PDF of the slides because everybody got excited about the moving formulas. But I guess it's okay to replay them in the recording, right? And a PDF.
Yeah, I could send the actual presentation deck as well. I think it's just that it's quite large. It's not too bad. 120 meg. Do you know what the upload limit is? It should be okay.
We'll share a Google Drive link and then feel free to upload and we can make it accessible.
Yeah, no problem. Let's do that.
Good. Okay, any other questions? Last chance. Okay, sounds good. Thanks a lot for everyone for joining the session. Thank you so much, Mark. Already excited for next week. Keep an eye on the Discord for the homework. Yeah, I think it would be cool to go over 3, 4, 5 variants of the homework results, and so much more.
Yeah,
I believe in the next session. So see you all next Thursday, same time. And thanks for today. Awesome lecture.
thank you everyone for attending. I'll see you next week.
See you.
See you
Great
next
lecture.
week.
Bye.
Bye.